in the scorched and unforgiving silence of the 1870s Kansas prairie, a landscape so vast, so desolate, and so indifferent to human suffering that it seemed to swallow the very souls of those who dared to traverse its golden undulating waves. There sat a solitary, weather-beaten structure known as the Bender Inn, a place that would eventually be etched into the dark annals of American history as the ultimate gateway to hell on earth. Operated by a family whose true origins were as murky and foul as the stagnant water of a sunless swamp, the Bloody Benders were a quartet of human predators who transformed the sacred unwritten law of frontier hospitality into a meticulously choreographed ritual of systematic and cold-blooded slaughter. There was the patriarch, John Bender Sr., a man of mountainous, hulking frame with a face like carved, weathered granite, whose guttural silence was more terrifying than any scream of. Agony, his wife, Elvira, a woman with eyes like cold, chipped flint and a tongue like a viper, who was whispered by the locals to be a witch who had murdered her way through multiple husbands in the East before fleeing to the lawless West, their son, John Jr., who masked a cunning, sadistic intellect behind a veneer of erratic, high-pitched laughter that set the townspeople's teeth on edge, and the true, brilliant architect of their grand deception, the ethereal and enigmatic Kate Bender. Kate was a creature of mesmerizing, hypnotic contrasts, a self-proclaimed spiritualist, queen of the occult, and healer, whose porcelain beauty was merely a shimmering veil over a heart of absolute compressed obsidian, and she would stand on the porch of their lonely cabin, her hair catching the dying, blood-red light of the prairie sun, beckoning weary travelers, lonely pioneers, and wealthy land seekers into a trap from which hearth, yet the air always held a faint metallic undertone, the ghostly lingering scent of dried iron and rot that the family could never truly scrub from the deep grain of the wooden floorboards. The guest would be guided with practiced, lethal grace to a specific seat at the dinner table, a heavy oak chair positioned with surgical intentionality against a thick, soot-stained canvas wagon cover that bisected the room like a theatrical backdrop for a tragedy that was about to unfold in total, chilling silence. As Kate sat directly opposite the victim, her voice dropping to a low, melodic hum, as she spun intricate tales of the spirit world and drew the traveler's entire consciousness into the predatory depth of her gaze, the two Bender men would slip like ink blots into the shadows behind the canvas curtain, their breathing synchronized with the ticking of a clock, their calloused hands gripping heavy, 10-pound iron sledgehammers with a familiarity born of dozens of previous, unrecorded kills. The flickering candlelight would throw grotesque, dancing shadows against the log walls, and just as the traveler began to feel the first sharp prickle of instinctual fear at the base of their neck, a sudden, primal intuition that the silence of the prairie outside was mirrored by a far more dangerous, predatory silence within the house. A thunderous, bone-shattering crack would erupt as the hammer swung through the canvas, caving in the back of the victim's skull in a sickening spray of gore and shattered memory. But the Benders did not merely kill for the meager profit of a traveler's purse. They killed with a terrifying, cult-like devotion to the act itself, and as the body slumped forward onto the dinner plate, Kate would rise with a slow, predatory elegance, her eyes wide with a dark, ecstatic light, as she unsheathed a razor-sharp butcher's knife from her apron to carve a jagged, crimson smile across the victim's throat, ensuring the floorboards drank every last drop of life before the hidden, counterweighted trapdoor was kicked open. The cellar beneath was a lightless, suffocating pit of despair, a black hole of American history where the bodies were stripped of their boots, their wedding rings, and their very dignity, left to pile up in the humid rot of the Kansas earth until the family could drag the remains out under the protective cover of a midnight thunderstorm to be interred. In the secret garden, an apple orchard, where the trees grew with a suspicious, unnatural, and terrifying vigor, fed by the decaying remains of the dozens who had checked into the inn but never checked out. The tension reached a fever pitch in the spring of 1873 when the disappearance of Dr. William York, a man of high social standing whose brother was a decorated Civil War colonel, brought a search party of 50 grim-faced armed men to the Benders' doorstep. The air turned electric with the threat of immediate violence as Kate Bender, ever the consummate actress, attempted to charm the colonel while standing mere inches above the blood-soaked trapdoor, her laughter ringing out like a death knell even as a shift in the prairie wind brought the undeniable, sickly sweet stench of the orchard to the nostrils of the searchers. Realizing that the shroud of their anonymity had been torn asunder and that the noose of justice was tightening around their throats, The family utilized a night of torrential rain and howling, gale-force winds to vanish into the trackless wilderness of the West, leaving behind a cabin that felt like a pulsing, open wound on the landscape. When the investigators finally breached the door with axes, they found a house of horrors that defied human comprehension. A cellar floor that was a literal sticky mire of clotted blood, and an orchard that yielded body after body after body, including the remains of an unidentified young girl whose wide, sightless eyes told the heartbreaking story of being buried alive beneath her father's corpse, her fingers still clawing at the dirt. The subsequent investigation revealed that the Benders were likely part of a larger, shadowy network of frontier outlaws, or perhaps even more chillingly, a family bound by incestuous and occult ties that made their bloodlust a form of dark worship. Despite a massive, nationwide manhunt that spanned from the frozen, jagged peaks of the Rockies to the sun-drenched, palm-lined shores of the Pacific, and despite thousands of frantic Bender sightings reported by paranoid citizens for the next 50 years, the family was never officially brought to justice, leading to enduring whispered theories that they had escaped to the jungles of South America or had been executed in the dead of night by a secret vigilante group that swore itself to a silence as deep and eternal as the prairie itself. To this day, the legend of the Bloody Benders remains the ultimate exercise in suspense and historical dread. A ghost story that haunts the American psyche, for it serves as a grim reminder that in the 19th century the most dangerous monsters didn't hide in the dark woods or under the bed. They invited you in for a warm dinner, smiled with practiced warmth as they poured your tea, and whispered of the spirits of the dead while they were actively preparing to turn you into one of them, leaving behind only an empty, cursed patch of Kansas, dirt where the grass still refuses to grow, and the wind, if you listen closely on a stormy night, still carries the rhythmic, ghostly thud of a hammer falling in the dark, an echo of a liturgy of fear that has no end.